Welcome back to Intro to Physical Anthropology. Today I want to talk about science and pseudoscience in the media. We're going to use some of the skills and some of the knowledge you have now about what science is and what science isn't to think critically when you're watching TV, when you're reading the news, that sort of thing. To help, I suggest you go to the handout section in the Chapter 2 module, and you will find there a handout that has this science toolkit and the science checklist, as well as an image of the scientific method that I showed you in the What is Science video. Now, as always, is this a foolproof way of knowing whether you can trust what you're seeing, watching, or listening to? No. But hopefully it will start helping you develop some instincts to think more critically about them. We have already talked about the science checklist, and the biggest things on here are that if it's scientific, then it's going to explain a natural phenomenon. That explanation has to be natural as well. It has to be testable, right? And there has to be some evidence, and the scientific community needs to be involved in some way. I will tell you right off the bat, the moment somebody starts saying the scientific community is ignoring this great discovery, you should be suspicious. You should be really suspicious. Not because I think the scientific community gets everything right all the time, but it's more likely that the person telling you that is trying to get you to believe them and not listen to the rest of the scientific community than it is that the scientific community really is missing out on the greatest discovery ever. Okay? Oops. For the science toolkit, it's a little more media focused. Some of this is familiar territory, right? Ask yourself where the information is coming from. And not just like, where's the video I'm watching coming from, but who are these experts that they're bringing on? Is their expertise actually in the thing they're talking about? Ask yourself, how confident am I that the views of the scientific community are being accurately portrayed here? It kind of goes along with the first one. If there aren't any scientists at all, you should be pretty suspicious, right? If there are scientists but they don't have expertise in the things they're talking about, maybe be a little suspicious. Is the scientific community's confidence in the ideas accurately portrayed? This is a big one. As you should have surmised from the What is Science video, disagreement is part of science. So we don't get to agreement right away. It's very rare that everybody's just like, oh, it's obviously true. But some disagreements are valid, and some disagreements are not so much disagreements about the idea itself, but about some of the specifics, right? The theory of evolution is not unchanged over the past 150 years. As we learned more things, like genetics, like DNA, these sorts of things, ecology, we started getting a clear picture of where some of the inconsistencies in the theory of natural selection lay, and how they weren't necessarily inconsistencies that disproved the theory, but in fact were instances that needed more explanation. So oftentimes disagreement in the scientific community gets blown out of proportion by people who want to exploit that to convince you of something. A great example of this is climate change. Every time you see talking heads on a talk show, you're going to have about climate change. You're going to have one scientist who says climate change is happening, and the other who says it isn't. Right? That's our American way. We think of problems as balanced. They have two sides, and if you hear both sides, then you can make up your own mind. Well, the problem is, there shouldn't just be one and one. That sort of indicates that both arguments are on equal footing in the scientific community. But that's not true. A study several years ago of scientific papers on climate change that were published, I think, back in 2007, found that of the 700 or so papers that were published that year, 97% agreed that not only was climate change happening, but that it was anthropogenic, that is, human-caused. And the 3% that didn't weren't necessarily claiming that climate change doesn't exist or doesn't happen. They were challenging some of the reasons that people thought it was anthropogenic. So they weren't even necessarily saying it wasn't anthropogenic. They were challenging some of the explanations to make them better. So you have nearly 100% of the climatological community agreeing on something that you're representing with supposedly equal sides here. Okay, so understanding whether the confidence in the idea is accurately portrayed is very important. Is the controversy misrepresented or blown out of proportion? Where can I get more information? Now, that's probably the most important one, because you may not know the answers to these. So starting to inform yourself on how to use the internet reliably. What are reliable sources for scientific information, and what are less reliable sources? And the final question is, yeah, there might be evidence for something, but like I said before, you can have evidence, but if it can't be replicated, and if it's an idea that's only supported by one piece of evidence, it's not a very strong argument for that. Doesn't mean it's not true, just means you need to keep making the case. So, use these, and I want you to use them now. I want you to go to the page in the module this week called Science and Pseudoscience. On that page, you're going to find this lecture, and you're also going to find 3 other videos. Now, content warning here. The videos are all about a phenomenon known as cattle mutilation. This is a phenomenon where worldwide, over past 50 or 60 years, ranchers have reported mysterious or unexplained deaths of their cattle. Oftentimes, they are mutilated, eviscerated with no signs of blood or very little signs of blood. Sometimes it's described as cuts looking like they were made with scalpels and that sort of thing. I'm going to show you 3 different representations of that controversy, right? About what caused it, and I'm going to ask you after each one to go through your checklists here, the toolkit and the scientific checklist, and think about each of those videos. I'll have a little comment then at the end here. Once you've watched all 3 and gone through your checklist yourself, come back to this video, hit pause in just a moment, come back to this video, and I'm going to say a few things myself about those videos. So go ahead and do that now. Press pause, and I will see you in a little bit. Okay, so we're back. You have watched all 3 videos, I hope. And one of the first things I want to say that I hope you noticed was that we have three very different sort of sources of reliability here, right? The first is a news program. And now on the one hand, we generally try to trust news programs to do some balance and, try to be responsible in reporting things. And in that story, they didn't get too bizarre, although the implication, we are sort of left with the implication that maybe aliens, at least one veterinarian thinks aliens did it, but we don't really have any experts other than the rancher himself. And to be honest, I don't think the rancher is as much of an expert in dead cows and the process of death and decomposition as other kinds of scientists might be. And the veterinarian wouldn't necessarily be either. So I'm a little skeptical myself there. At the same time, they don't really go out on too much of a limb. So is this information, are the views of the scientific community accurately portrayed? Hard to tell. They don't really give us the scientific community, do they? Is it an overblown controversy? I don't really get a sense from that one. So these are question marks that we should ask ourselves. That leads us to, where can I get more information? I'm going to leave that up to you, but, some things I might look at is going online and seeing if, I wouldn't just go on and type in cattle mutilations. I'll get all sorts of things. But one thing you might look at is cattle mutilations skeptic, or cattle mutilations explained, that sort of thing. These aren't guaranteed to give you reliable results, though. You still have to vet the sources of information. And what you really want to look for are a major, national newspaper like the New York Times, the Washington Post, that sort of thing might be reliable. Websites on a college address that look like they're legitimately part of the college or university, and not just somebody's personal page where they've thrown up a bunch of crackpot theories. Looking at researchers who have actual degrees and expertise in relevant fields. In this case, death and decomposition, something we call taphonomy, which is what happens to dead things after they die. And look at those. You might look at an ecologist who maybe knows more about the wild fauna around there as well. So I'm going to put a big question mark next to this one about what it can actually tell us about cattle mutilations. It raises the issue, but it doesn't really tell us anything, does it? The next one is a show from called The Unexplained from the Discovery Channel. One of the things I hope you noticed was the use of music to emphasize the sort of conspiratorial tone. Now, these guys really think they're not saying it's UFOs, but it's UFOs. Not to come off as a meme here, but that's what they're talking about. And their only scientific expert is the UFO investigator, whose only expertise is his own self-proclaimed expertise and the fact that he runs a website. That's it. That's not part of an academic community. That's not part of it's not even clear that there's an actual field of research in science that looks at this, from what I can tell. The rancher makes a good case for he knows his cattle. He's been doing this a long time. But again, I want to point out, how many dead cattle has he come across in his lifetime? And when he came across them, how often did he do detailed analyses of how they decomposed? It's a good question, I think. So again, scientific community not really showing up here. They give us the illusion of it, but they're not really showing it to us. So I got to give this one maybe even less of a question mark here, because they're really kind of going out on a limb trying to give you an explanation without any of this reliable sourcing of information going on. And by the way, UFOs is, maybe I'll make a video about this later, but about my own opinion on UFOs, but the way UFO explanations are brought up, you might as well be saying ghosts did it, you might as well be saying God did it, or angels did it, any other kind of supernatural creature, because we actually have no knowledge of alien races whatsoever. So you're basically suggesting an unknown explanation. The final one is really interesting, because even though the expert isn't a scientist, he's walking you through the scientific method, isn't he? He's a sheriff who decided, okay, let's set up a situation that might be similar and just observe what happens. Let's set a carcass out and watch it decompose. Maybe we will see, so if there is a natural explanation for this, we will be able to see it happen in real time. And sure enough, what they find is very quickly they find that one of the chief culprits is actually a botfly, right? It's a fly. And it's the maggots that clean up the blood, that eat soft tissues, that some of the characteristic sort of, supposed removal of the anus or the reproductive organs, well, those are the places where the softest tissue is, so they're the easiest places for both scavengers and insects to get into the carcass. Same with the area around the lips and the eyes and the ears, right? These are preferable areas for these. So they go a long way to explaining how those cows might have ended up looking the way they looked. I hope it wasn't too shocking to see some of the images. By the way, too, something to mention about the Discovery Channel one. There were a couple of brief shots of the actual photographs of that rancher's cows, but most of them were reconstructions that looked nothing like the photographs. They were reconstructions made to look like the description and not like the photographs. So another reason to be kind of suspicious up there. But here you go. Now, does this mean it was definitely what this guy discovered? Well, I would want to know more about what scientists say about this. I happen to know that actually that is kind of the main explanation in the scientific community, that, look, these are perfectly explained by natural processes of death and decomposition. Absolutely natural. But just going off that video, I would still have some questions, and I would still want to know a little more. But it certainly starts seeming plausible, because at least they went through and came up with a hypothesis. This is the result of natural phenomena that have something to do with a decomposing corpse. They set up an experiment. They set out the corpse and observed to see if any natural phenomena created the same results. And what did they observe? Their observations supported their hypothesis that there was a natural explanation for this. So, again, you might want to do more research. You might want to replicate this in different conditions, but, there you go. It's a very interesting, it's a very clear example of something where I'd probably give the third video the highest grade on this in terms of reliability and believability here. I hope you kind of followed my thought process. Maybe you got there yourself too, and if you didn't, don't worry about it. This takes practice. And the more you do it and the more you learn, the better you'll get at it. So, I hope everybody has, whatever you're doing, having a weekend, having a summer, or just having a great evening, take care of yourself, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.